Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. You think you know what's scary? Wait until you hear these 8 real stories about wild people living in the Appalachian Mountains. These aren't made up. They really happened. People went into the woods and came face to face with things that used to be human. After today's video, you'll never look at the forest the same way again. Hit subscribe and tell me where you're from in the comments. Now let's dive into these nightmare encounters. My name is Tyler Matthews, and I've been delivering pizza for Mario's in Huntington, West Virginia for 2 years now. I started this job right after high school to save money for community college. It's not glamorous work, but the tips are decent, and my boss Marco lets me work around my class schedule. I've delivered to sketchy neighborhoods, drunk college kids, and even had my car broken into once. But what happened on a cold Thursday night in November changed everything I thought I knew about this job. At Mario's, we close at midnight on weekdays. I drive a beat-up Honda Civic with magnetic pizza signs on the doors and a warming bag that keeps orders hot for about 40 minutes. My usual route covers downtown Huntington and the suburbs, but sometimes we get orders way out in the county where cell towers are spotty and GPS gets confused. That Thursday started normal. I'd already made 6 deliveries by 11:30 p.m. and was looking forward to going home. The restaurant was quiet, except for kitchen sounds and Marco counting the register. Then the phone rang. "Tyler, you got one more," Marco called out. "Big order, $67, Lincoln County, way out on Route 152. I checked the address on the receipt. It was at least 30 minutes each way into the backwoods. "That's gonna put me past midnight, Marco." Kid ordered 3 large pizzas, breadsticks, and wings. Paid with credit card and tipped $20. Just take it. $20 was too good to pass up. I loaded the warming bag and headed out. The first 20 minutes went fine. Route 152 starts as a regular 2-lane highway. But the further you go, the more it turns into winding back roads. Streetlights disappear. Houses get spread out. My GPS worked until I hit the mountains, then the signal died completely. I had to use the written directions Marco gave me. Turn left at the rusted mailbox shaped like a fist. Follow dirt road for 2 miles. The fish mailbox was half buried in weeds. The dirt road was full of potholes that made my car bounce and rattle. Tree branches scraped my windows. I couldn't see any house lights ahead, just my headlights cutting through darkness. After what felt like forever, I saw a shape through the trees. An old farmhouse with white paint peeling off the sides. No porch light, no yard light, nothing. But I could see flickering orange light in the windows like candles were burning inside. I parked and grabbed the pizza bag. The house looked abandoned except for those candles. Dead leaves covered the porch and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. But this was the address on the receipt, so I knocked. Heavy footsteps moved around inside. Then I heard breathing right against the door, like someone was pressing their face to the wood. The door slowly creaked open. A woman stood there, maybe 30 years old, completely naked. Her skin was covered in dirt and what looked like old scars. Her fingernails had grown into long black claws. She sniffed at the pizza boxes like a dog smelling food. Pizza delivery?" I managed to say. She made clicking sounds with her tongue toward the back of the house. 3 more people crawled out from the shadows behind her. 2 men and a teenager, all naked, all moving on their hands and knees like animals. "Food," the woman whispered, grabbing my wrist. Her fingers were strong enough to crack bone. "Warm food. Good." The others surrounded me in the doorway, breathing heavily and making excited grunting noises. Their eyes reflected the candlelight like wild animals. I realized these weren't normal customers. They were predators who had learned to order pizza to lure delivery drivers out here. The woman pulled me inside while the others blocked the door behind me. The smell hit me like a wall. Rotting meat huma, and waste and something sweet and sick like infection. Bones were scattered across the floor. Some looked like deer or rabbit bones, but others were too big, too human-shaped. They tore into the pizza boxes with their teeth and claws, eating the cardboard along with the food. Blood and saliva dripped from their mouths as they fought over pieces, growling and snapping at each other like dogs. The teenage boy tried to bite my arm. I jerked away and dropped my car keys. They clattered on the wooden floor. Everything went silent. All four heads snapped toward the sound with perfect predator focus. "Leaving?" the woman asked, tilting her head at an unnatural angle. "Not done eating yet." I backed toward a window while they slowly stood up. They moved wrong, like their joints were broken. Black saliva dripped from their mouths as they smiled, showing teeth that had been filed to sharp points. I grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a table and swung it at the nearest man. It connected with his skull in a wet crack. He stumbled backward but kept coming, black blood pouring down his face while he laughed in choking gasps. The teenager lunged at my legs. I kicked him in the throat and heard cartilage crunch. He rolled on the floor, making gurgling sounds. The woman screamed. Not a human sound, more like a rabid animal. She charged with her claws extended toward my face. I threw the candlestick at her and dove through the window. Glass exploded around me, shredding my jacket and cutting my arms. I hit the ground hard and rolled, scrambling to my feet as they poured out of the house after me. They moved faster than humans should be able to, especially on all fours. I could hear their breathing right behind me as I ran toward my car. My keys were still inside the house. I reached the Honda and yanked on the door handle. Locked. Fingers grabbed my shirt from behind, tearing the fabric as one of them climbed onto my back. I threw myself against the car door and the window shattered from the impact. I reached through and unlocked the door from inside, cutting my armwards, on the broken glass. The engine cranked once, twice, then started. I floored the gas pedal as they climbed on the hood, clawing at the windshield. One of them held on as I drove down the dirt road, his face pressed against the glass, staring at me with those animal eyes. He finally lost his grip after half a mile and tumbled into the darkness. I drove straight to the police station, bleeding from glass cuts and claw marks on my arms. The desk sergeant thought I was drunk or high until he saw the blood and how bad I was shaking. 2 patrol cars went out to investigate. They found the house empty except for human bones in the basement and my pizza boxes licked completely clean. No sign of the family. Forensics identified remains from at least 6 different people. 3 were delivery drivers who had disappeared over the past year. The bones showed bite marks consistent with human teeth, and some had been cracked open for marrow. Police set up surveillance on the house, but the cannibals never returned. They had vanished deeper into the mountain wilderness, taking their nightmare with them. I quit Mario's the next day and got a job at the grocery store downtown. Day shifts only, well-lit parking lot, security cameras everywhere. Safe. But 6 months later, another delivery driver disappeared on the same road. They found him 3 days later with chunks bitten out of his arms and legs. He survived long enough to describe the same family of feral cannibals, but now there were 5 of them instead of 4. That's when I realized they were growing, either having children or converting new victims somehow, learning, adapting their hunting techniques. 2 more drivers have vanished since then. Each time the survivors report more attackers. The pack is growing stronger, smarter. Local police won't patrol that area anymore after losing an officer who investigated alone. MOT. Ved 2, Ohio, 6 months after my attack. But I still check my locks 3 times every night. Sometimes I wake up hearing that clicking sound they made when they smelled fresh food. The woman's face haunts my dreams, those animal eyes studying me like I was meat to be processed. The worst part is knowing they're still out there, still hungry, still learning how to hunt humans more effectively. And every pizza order to a remote address makes some other driver the next potential victim on their menu. Every delivery driver in 3 counties knows this story now, but some still take the risk for a $20 tip. Because we're all just trying to pay for college, save for a car, or feed our families. We tell ourselves it won't happen to us. But deep in those West Virginia mountains, something inhuman is waiting. Patient, hungry, and they've learned that all they need to do is pick up a phone and order some food. The next time your pizza takes a long time to arrive, remember this story. Because somewhere out there, a young driver just like me might be pulling up to a dark house with no lights, carrying warm food to things that hunt humans for sport. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've been working security for 12 years now. Started right out of high school doing mall security, then moved up to office buildings, warehouses, that kind of thing. Nothing too crazy. mostly just walking around making sure doors are locked and keeping an eye out for trouble. The pay's decent, and I like working nights. Less people around, less drama. I figured after 12 years I'd seen everything there was to see in this job. I was wrong. What happened during my 3 months at Riverside Cemetery in Hazard, Kentucky, changed everything I thought I knew about night security work. Some places, you're not just watching over property. Some places, you're watching over things that should stay quiet. Riverside Cemetery sits on about 40 acres just outside Hazard, right where the mountains start getting steep. It's been around since 1847, which means there's a lot of history buried in those hills. The old section has graves from the Civil War, and some of the headstones are so weathered you can barely read the names anymore. The newer section is more organized, with paved roads and better lighting, but the old part is where most of my patrol route took me. The job seemed perfect when I started in October. Simple duties: drive the patrol cart around the cemetery every hour, check the gates, make sure nobody's causing trouble. The cemetery office gave me a security booth near the main entrance with cameras, radio equipment, and a logbook to track my rounds. Most nights were dead quiet, no pun intended. Maybe a raccoon or two, sometimes teenagers trying to climb the fence for some ghost hunting nonsense. The pay was better than my last job, and my supervisor, Janet, was pretty hands-off. She'd stop by once a week to check on things, but mostly I was on my own from midnight to 8 in the morning. The cemetery gates, locked automatical, fly at sunset, and I had the only key to get out before morning. It felt secure, safe even. Just me and a few thousand people who weren't going anywhere. I should have known something was off when the maintenance crew started mentioning weird things. Tools going missing, equipment moved around overnight, fresh holes that nobody remembered digging. They blamed it on teenagers or maybe homeless people getting in somehow. The fence was old and had some weak spots, but I never saw anyone during my patrols. That all changed on Tuesday night, November 15th, around 3:30 in the morning. I was doing my regular hourly patrol, driving the electric cart down the main road toward the old section. The headlights cut through the darkness pretty well, and I knew every pothole and turn by heart. Everything seemed normal until I got to the Civil War Memorial area. Fresh flowers were scattered everywhere, not placed on graves like you'd expect. These were thrown around like someone had a tantrum. Roses, carnations, baby's breath, all mixed up with what looked like chewed up bones. Animal bones, I thought at first. Maybe a dog got into the flower arrangements and made a mess. But then I saw the footprints. I parked the cart and got out with my flashlight, a big mag light that could light up half the cemetery. The footprints were in the soft dirt between the headstones, and they were definitely human. But something was wrong with them. They were too wide, like whoever made them had really spread out toes. And there were these scratch marks next to each print, like fingernails or claws had dragged through the dirt. "Cemetery's closed," I called out, following procedure. Sometimes people climbed the fence thinking it was funny to wander around at night. Usually they ran off when they heard my voice. This time, someone answered back. "We live here now," came a woman's voice from somewhere in the darkness. "With the sleeping people." The voice came from behind the big Civil War monument, maybe 30 feet away. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound and called out again. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This is private property." She stepped into my light and I nearly dropped the flashlight. She was completely naked, covered head to toe in cemetery dirt like she'd been rolling around in fresh graves. Her hair was long and matted with mud and what looked like flower petals braided in. But the worst part was what she was holding, a human skull, cradled against her chest like a baby. "We don't hurt the sleeping people," she said, rocking the skull gently. "They don't mind sharing their home." That's when I realized she wasn't alone. They came up from behind headstones like they'd been hiding there, waiting for me. 5 people total, all different ages, all naked and filthy. A teenage boy, maybe 16, an older man with a long gray beard, 2 women who might have been in their 30s. All of them had that same look, wild eyes, dirty skin, and flowers and bones braided into their hair like some kind of twisted jewelry. The teenage boy dropped down on all fours and started crawling toward me, sniffing at my boots like a dog. The others just stood there watching me with those wild eyes. "How long have you been living here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My radio was clipped to my belt, but something told me not to reach for it just yet. "Long time," the woman with the skull said. "We watch security man walk every night. Learn the path, learn the time. Very predictable." They'd been watching me for weeks, maybe months, learning my patrol routine. While I thought I was alone in the cemetery, they'd been there the whole time, invisible among the graves. I started backing toward my cart, and they followed, moving in a loose circle around me. The teenage boy was still on all fours, but the others walked upright, though their movement seemed wrong somehow. Too fluid, like they'd forgotten how normal people move. "This is our home now," the Omen explained. "Dead people, very quiet neighbors. Much better than living people." As we moved through the cemetery, I could see what they'd been doing. Crude shelters built between the mausoleums using stolen cemetery equipment. Shovels, tarps, flower arrangement stands. They'd turned the old section into some kind of camp, hidden so well I'd never noticed it during my patrols. When I reached my cart, I tried to start it up, but the battery was dead. The headlights flickered once and went out. "Can't leave," the woman said, still rocking that skull. "Security man locked the gates. Only dead people leave in boxes." She was right. I'd locked the main gate myself at midnight, just like every night. The cemetery was surrounded by an 8-foot fence with barbed wire on top. There was an emergency exit by the maintenance shed, but that was half a mile away through the dark cemetery, with these people watching my every move. "What do you want?" I asked. "Lonely job," the woman said. "Walking around dead people all night. Come live with us. Much more fun." The teenage boy started scratching at my cart with his fingernails. They were long and sharp, more like claws than normal nails. The sound of them scraping against the metal made my skin crawl. I decided to make a run for the security booth. The booth was only about 200 yards away, but it felt like miles with those 5 people following me through the darkness. They didn't run, just walked at that same fluid pace, like they knew I couldn't really escape. When I reached the booth and slammed the door behind me, they gathered around the windows, pressing their faces against the glass. The woman with the skull breathed on the window, fogging it up, then drew a smiley face in the condensation with her finger. "Let us in, security man," the teenage boy said, scratching at the door with those claw-like nails. "We show you how to talk to sleeping people." I grabbed my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. The antenna wire had been cut. They'd sabotaged my communications while I was doing my patrol. Through the windows, I watched them spread out around the cemetery like they were performing some kind of ritual. They danced between the open graves, and that's when I realized what those holes were that the maintenance crew had been finding. These people had been digging up graves. Fresh holes dotted the old section, with pieces of broken coffins scattered around. They'd been living in the empty graves like animals in burrows, sleeping in the coffins during the day when the maintenance crew was around. One of them was gnawing on what looked like a human bone, cracking it with their teeth. The sound carried through the night air, and I felt sick. They kept dancing and howling at the moon like a pack of wolves. The woman with the skull held it up toward the sky and started singing something in a language I didn't recognize. Or maybe it wasn't a language at all, just sounds. Around 4 a.m., they came back to my booth and started testing the windows and doors, looking for weak spots. The teenage boy climbed up on the roof somehow. I could hear him up there, scratching at the metal. "Dead people very quiet," came his voice from above. "You be quiet too. We make you family." They started throwing bones and rocks at the booth, trying to break the windows. One window cracked, and the teenage boy immediately stuck his arm through, feeling around for the door lock. I grabbed my heavy flashlight and beat his arm until he pulled it back, screaming like an animal. Blood dripped through the broken window, but they didn't give up. "Dawn comes soon," the woman called out. "But we patient, we wait. We always catch the security people." That's when I realized this had happened before. Other guards, other nights. Maybe that's why the job was available in the first place. I found my emergency flare gun in the desk drawer and fired it through the broken window. The red flare lit up the entire cemetery, and they scattered like roaches when you turn on the lights. but they didn't leave. I could see them hiding behind headstones, waiting. They kept attacking until the first hint of sunrise around 6:30 a.m. Then, like vampires or something, they just melted away among the graves. 1 minute they were there, the next they were gone. I waited an hour after full sunrise before leaving the booth. The evidence was everywhere. Dozens of opened graves, makeshift shelters, caches of human bones they'd been gnawing on. I found clothes and personal items that must have belonged to previous victims or previous guards. My supervisor, Janet, arrived at 8 a.m. to find me barricaded in the booth, covered in blood from the broken glass. I tried to explain what happened, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. The police searched the cemetery but found only the disturbed graves and empty shelters. The grave robbers, because that's what the police called them, had vanished into the Appalachian wilderness. Riverside Cemetery hired day-shift-only security after that incident. 3 guards quit within the first month, all reporting strange sounds and feelings of being watched. The cemetery board decided it wasn't worth the liability. I transferred to mall security the next week, much safer dealing with shoplifters and teenagers than whatever those things were living in the cemetery. But sometimes, when I'm driving home late at night, I take the long way that goes past Riverside Cemetery. And sometimes I see figures moving among the graves, still dancing under the moonlight, still hunting for new family members. The job posting for cemetery security is still up on the county website. They've raised the pay twice since I left, but nobody lasts more than a few weeks. If you're ever driving through Hazard, Kentucky, and you see that job posting, keep driving. Some graveyards aren't just resting places for the dead. Some of them are hunting grounds for things that should have stayed buried. My name is Linda Chen, and I've been working for the U.S. Census Bureau for 8 years. I started right out of college with a degree in sociology, thinking I'd help paint an accurate picture of America's communities. Most of my job involves data entry and phone surveys, but every few years during the official count, we get sent out for fieldwork. I've knocked on doors in rough neighborhoods, climbed stairs in broken-down apartment buildings, and talked to people who'd rather stay invisible to the government. I thought I'd seen every kind of resistance and hostility possible. But what happened last October in the mountains of southern Ohio changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Some places don't want to be counted, and some people will do anything to stay that way. It was a Thursday morning when my supervisor handed me a stack of addresses that hadn't responded to our mail surveys. "Rural route," she said, like that explained everything. "Appalachian region, about 2 hours southeast. Shouldn't take more than a day." The area was called Devil's Backbone, which should have been my first warning. According to our records, 12 families lived scattered throughout this remote hollow, completely off the main roads. No internet service, spotty cell coverage, and most had never filled out a census form in their lives. I loaded my government sedan with clipboards, official badges, and information packets. My tablet had the GPS coordinates loaded, and I carried backup paper maps since mountain roads could be tricky. The Census Bureau gave us specific training for difficult interviews. Always identify yourself clearly, explain the legal requirements, and never argue about politics or government authority. We had badges, official letters, and business cards to prove our legitimacy. Most people cooperated once they understood we weren't tax collectors or immigration officers. The drive took me through typical Ohio farmland before climbing into heavily forested hills. My GPS signal got weaker as I followed increasingly narrow roads until I was bumping along a dirt path that barely qualified as a driveway. The first address on my list belonged to someone named Earl Hutchins, and his house sat in a small clearing surrounded by dense woods. Earl appeared on his porch before I even parked. He was maybe 65, wearing overalls and a suspicious expression. But when I showed my badge and explained about the census, he relaxed slightly. "Government lady," he said, nodding toward my clipboard. "Figured you'd come around eventually. Just need to verify how many people live here, Mr. Hutchins. Takes about 5 minutes." He answered my questions politely enough. Lived alone since his wife passed, grew most of his own food, got by on Social Security. But when I asked for directions to the next address up the hollow, his face changed. "You don't want to go further up there," he said, glancing toward the tree line. "Some folks up in Devil's Backbone, they don't take kindly to strangers." especially government types. I explained that it was federal law, that everyone had to be counted. Earl just shook his head and went back inside, but I heard him mutter something about stubborn government people as he closed the door. The dirt road continued deeper into the hollow, getting rougher with each mile. My sedan scraped bottom on several rocks and branches scratched the paint. According to my map, the next house should be around the next bend, but when I found it, the place looked abandoned. No lights, no vehicles, windows boarded up. I parked and walked around the property anyway, documenting everything on my tablet. That's when I noticed signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, garbage bags that hadn't been there long, and when I touched the chimney, it was still warm. Someone had been here recently, maybe within the last few hours. As I photographed the property for my report, I heard something that made me freeze. Children laughing somewhere in the forest behind the house. But the sound was wrong somehow. Too wild, too free, like kids who'd never been taught to play quietly. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" And the laughter stopped instantly. Then 3 kids emerged from the trees. 2 boys and a girl, maybe between 8 and 14 years old. They were completely naked and moved like they'd forgotten how to walk normally, crouched low, darting between trees, studying me like I was some strange animal. Their hair was long and matted, and they had scratches and dirt all over their skin. When I called out again, they scattered back into the forest. But I could hear adult voices calling them back, speaking words I couldn't understand. Not English, but not Spanish or any other language I recognized. Something older, rougher around the edges. I should have left then, should have marked the address as inaccessible and moved on. But I'd been trained to be thorough, and those children clearly lived somewhere up the hollow. The Census Bureau was very strict about accuracy. Every person had to be counted, no exceptions. I followed what looked like a footpath deeper into the woods, my tablet beeping occasionally when it caught a weak GPS signal. The trail led to a clearing where several ramshackle buildings connected by wooden walkways and rope bridges. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and I could see gardens, chicken coops, and what looked like a small moonshine still. A woman appeared on one of the walkways above me. She was maybe 45, wearing torn clothes that might have been a dress once, with suspicious eyes that tracked my every movement. "Government lady," she called down, "you here to count us for the taxmen? The war draft?" I held up my badge and clipboard. "Just conducting the official census, ma'am. It's required by federal law, and all information is kept confidential." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We already been counted," she said. "Counted out, counted off, counted as nothing by your government." More people began emerging from the buildings, adults and children, maybe 20 or 30 total. They moved wrong, like they'd forgotten normal human posture after years of living in isolation. Some had obvious deformities, missing fingers, scarred faces, limbs that bent at unnatural angles. All of them watched me with the same hostile suspicion. I explained about census confidentiality, about how the information couldn't be shared with other government agencies, but they began surrounding me, cutting off my path back to the car. An old man emerged who was clearly their leader, missing one eye, with ritual scars covering both arms like some kind of primitive tattoos. "Government took our land," he spat. "Took our jobs, our future. Now government lady comes to count what's left." I realized this wasn't just rural poverty. These people had been systematically failed by every institution, healthcare, education, economic opportunity. They'd been pushed so far to the margins that they'd created their own society, their own rules, their own definition of family. "We made our own way up here," the leader continued. "Our own justice, our own blood, our own truth. Don't need your government counting us like cattle." The children crept closer, studying my clipboard and official badge like they were artifacts from another world. One little girl tried to eat my pen, while a boy attempted to tear pages from my census forms. They'd been living outside civilization so long that basic social interactions seemed foreign to them. My tablet started acting up. The screen flickered, GPS showed impossible coordinates, and the battery drained from 78% to 15% in seconds. The deeper I'd gotten into Devil's Backbone, the more my equipment malfunctioned. "You stay," the woman decided, studying me like I was a puzzle to solve. "Count us proper. Learn how we really live. Become part of the family." Understood they meant to keep me permanently, add me to their isolated community by force. They'd done this before. I could see it in their organized movements, the way they blocked escape routes without seeming to coordinate. They led me to a central building where I saw the horrifying truth of their family structure. Children with different facial features but similar deformities. The result of generations of inbreeding and isolation. Adults who'd clearly been outsiders once, but had been broken down and rebuilt in this community's image. "Count them," the leader ordered, pointing to a group of people who barely looked human anymore. Their eyes held a broken emptiness that spoke of years of psychological conditioning. That's when I realized some of these family members had been government workers once. A woman wearing the faded remains of what might have been a social worker's blazer. A man with a utility company patch still barely visible on his torn shirt. They'd been captured, converted, and integrated into this mountain clan over decades. The leader smiled when he saw my recognition. "Mail carriers, health inspectors, child welfare workers," he said. "Government sends them, we keep them. They learn to be part of something real instead of pushing papers for people who don't care." My official clipboard became a weapon when I swung it at the nearest captor, trying to fight my way toward what I hoped was an exit. But they moved as a coordinated unit, surrounding and subduing me without causing serious injury. They'd done this many times before. "Easy, government lady," the woman soothed. "Fighting just makes the learning harder. Acceptance is much easier." I saw my future in the broken eyes of the previous captives. Eventual surrender to this isolated existence. My census training turned toward counting and organizing their primitive community, my profession. Identity slowly dissolved until I became another converted family member. While they debated my fate in their strange language, I broke free and ran toward the forest, hoping to circle back to my car. They followed but didn't seem urgent about it. They knew this terrain like I knew government forms, and they believed I couldn't escape their mountain. I found Earl's house and pounded on his door, begging him to help me, to call the police or the Census Bureau or anyone with authority. But he just shook his head sadly. "They'll let you go eventually," he said. "If you're lucky. If you're not, you'll learn to like it up there. Government pushed them too far, too long. Now they push back." Earl walked to an old CB radio and had a conversation with someone up at the compound. I couldn't understand most of it, but I heard my name and saw him gesture toward me several times. After 10 minutes, he nodded and put down the microphone. "They'll let you reach your car," he said, "in exchange for you keeping quiet about what you saw. File your report however you want, but don't bring law enforcement up here. Deal?" I agreed immediately. Earl called the compound again, spoke briefly, then pointed toward the path back to my sedan. "Go now. Drive straight out. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't ever come up Devil's Backbone again." I ran to my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. As I drove down the mountain, I could see figures watching from the tree line, making sure I understood the boundaries they'd established. Back at the regional office, I filed my report marking Devil's Backbone as inaccessible due to dangerous road conditions and requested reassignment away from rural routes. My supervisor didn't ask questions. Field workers requesting transfers from mountain assignments wasn't unusual. But 6 months later, another census worker disappeared in the same region. James Morrison, 15 years experience, sent to verify addresses that hadn't responded to the mail survey. His car was found 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine, but his body was never recovered. The official report called it an accident. Mountain roads could be treacherous. 2 weeks after that, a hiker claimed he saw Morrison working in a garden at some remote compound, wearing torn clothes and moving like he'd forgotten how to stand upright. When the police investigated, they found nothing but empty forest. The Bureau now considers that hollow off-limits, officially due to geographic accessibility issues. But I know the real truth. The population up Devil's Backbone keeps growing, one government worker at a time. Every inspector, surveyor, or official who ventures too deep into those mountains becomes a permanent resident, counted among the lost rather than the living. Sometimes I wonder if Earl is still there, still answering his door when government vehicles come up that road, still negotiating with the compound on his CB radio, still giving visitors the choice between leaving immediately or learning to like it up there. I never went back to find out. Some places don't want to be counted, and some people will kill to stay invisible. The Census Bureau taught me that everyone matters, that every person deserves to be acknowledged and included in the official record, but they never taught me what to do when the people you're trying to count decide they'd rather count you instead. My name is Bobby Mitchell, and I've been running a mobile mechanic service in Asheville, North Carolina for 15 years. I started out working in a regular garage, but I always liked the freedom of being on the road, going wherever broken-down cars needed fixing. There's something satisfying about showing up when people are stuck and helpless, then getting them back on their way. I've pulled engines out of ditches after wrecks, fixed alternators in parking lots during thunderstorms, and jumped dead batteries at 3 in the morning. I thought I'd seen every kind of breakdown and every type of customer. But what happened on a Sunday evening last October on Highway 226 near Chimney Rock changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Some calls aren't really calls for help at all. I keep my Ford F-350 stocked with everything I might need: wrenches, socket sets, multimeters, battery chargers, brake fluid, oil, belts, hoses, and a portable air compressor. The truck bed has toolboxes bolted down on both sides, with a small crane for lifting heavy parts. I've got jumper cables thick as your thumb, a generator for power tools, and enough spare parts to fix most common problems right on the spot. My customers pay premium prices because they don't have to get towed or wait until morning. When your car dies, I bring the garage to you. That Sunday started normal enough. I'd spent the morning replacing brake pads on a Honda in a Walmart parking lot, then fixed a fuel pump on a Chevy pickup at a gas station. Around 5 in the evening, I was heading home thinking about dinner and a football game when my phone rang. The caller ID just showed a local number I didn't recognize. "Bobby's Mobile Mechanics," I answered, like I always do. "Oh, thank God," a woman's voice said. She sounded desperate, almost crying. "Are you still working? I know it's Sunday, but we're stranded we're kids and my husband's hurt bad." I could hear what sounded like children crying in the background and wind blowing. "Where are you located, ma'am?" "Highway 226, about 5 miles past Chimney Rock. Our minivan just died and we can't get cell service to call anyone else. Please, my husband hit his head when the van broke down and it's getting dark." Something about the call felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was how she found my number when she said she couldn't get cell service, or how the background noise sounded more like wind through trees than highway traffic. But a family with kids in trouble trumps my paranoia every time. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told her. "What kind of minivan and what color? And what's your name?" "It's a white Honda Odyssey. My name's Sarah. Hurry, please." The line went dead. I turned my truck around and headed toward Chimney Rock, checking my GPS for the route. Highway 226 gets pretty remote past the tourist areas, winding through mountain forest with no streetlights and spotty cell coverage. I figured it was probably an alternator or dead battery, common problems that strand families right when they're trying to get home. The sun was setting behind the mountains as I drove, casting long shadows across the road. I passed a few scattered houses, then nothing but trees on both sides. My headlights cut through the gathering darkness, and I started watching for a white minivan with hazard lights blinking. I found them exactly where Sarah had said they'd be, pulled off on a wide shoulder next to a steep embankment. The Honda Odyssey sat dark and still, no hazard lights flashing. That was the first thing that bothered me. People with dead batteries don't usually turn off their hazards if they still have any power left, but maybe they were trying to save what little battery they had. I pulled up behind the van, leaving my headlights on and emergency flashers running. A woman got out of the passenger side before I even stopped rolling. She was maybe 35, wearing a clean jacket and jeans, but something about her looked wrong in the headlight glare. Her hair was neat, but there was dirt caked under her fingernails, and her eyes had a wild, bright look that made my skin crawl. "Thank God you came," she said, walking over as I got out of my truck. Her voice had that same desperate edge from the phone, but it sounded fake now, like she was reading lines from a script. "You're Sarah?" I asked, grabbing my basic tool bag and multimeter. "Yes, that's me." She gestured toward the minivan. "My husband Dave is in the driver's seat. He's been unconscious since we broke down." I followed her to the van, my boots crunching on gravel. Through the windshield, I could see a man slumped over the steering wheel, not moving. In the back seats, 3 children sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. They didn't turn to look at me or wave or act curious like kids usually do when a stranger shows up. They just sat there with their eyes reflecting my flashlight beam, like animals caught in headlights. "What were the symptoms when it died?" I asked, popping the hood release. "Just stopped running," Sarah said. "No warning, no strange noises, just dead." I lifted the hood and shined my flashlight into the engine compartment. What I saw there made my blood run cold. The battery cables had been cut clean through with some kind of blade, not frayed or corroded like they would be from normal wear. Someone had deliberately severed them. The air filter housing was open, and it was stuffed full of rocks and dirt, completely clogging the intake. "Ma'am," I said slowly, keeping my voice calm, "this wasn't a breakdown. Someone sabotaged this vehicle on purpose." Sarah's desperate expression melted away, replaced by a smile that showed too many teeth. "I know," she said. That's when I heard movement in the trees around us. Branches cracking, footsteps on dead leaves, the soft whisper of people moving through the forest. My hand tightened on my flashlight and I took a step back toward my truck. The unconscious husband sat up in the driver's seat and turned to grin at me through the windshield. His teeth had been filed to sharp points, and his eyes gleamed with the same predatory light as his wife's. "Thanks for coming so quick, mechanic man," he called out through the open door, his voice thick with a mountain accent I hadn't heard over the phone. "We've been waiting for you." The 3 children started giggling then, high, wild sounds that definitely didn't come from normal kids. They turned in their seats to stare at me with those unblinking eyes, and I saw they moved wrong, joints too flexible, heads tilting at angles that hurt to look at. More people emerged from the tree line, moving like hunters who had been positioned for an ambush. 5, 6, maybe 7 of them, closing in on all sides. They surrounded my truck while I backed toward the driver's door, my tool bag clutched in both hands. "We've been calling mechanics for months," Sarah explained, still smiling that terrible smile. "Hard to get good help out here in the mountains, but you boys always come running when you hear about stranded families." I realized they'd been using fake emergencies to lure service workers to this remote spot. The abandoned minivan was their trap, the desperate phone call their bait. And I had walked right into it. "Mechanics got good tools," the husband said, climbing out of the van and eyeing my truck bed full of equipment. "Expensive tools. Plus, you boys know how to fix things, build things, make things work better." The children climbed out of the minivan, and I saw they moved like they'd been raised wild, more animal than human. They'd been taught to hunt using modern technology as a lure, their parents training them to be predators from birth. Had been, "Treat useful people real good," the woman added, pulling a knife from her jacket. It wasn't store-bought, but hand-forged from scrap metal, the edge worn sharp from use. Dead ones, not so much. They moved to surround my truck, cutting off escape routes with the coordinated precision of a wolf pack. One of the children, a girl who couldn't have been more than 10, tried to grab a wrench from my tool bag. "Don't be difficult," the man warned. "We got plans for you, mechanic man. Lots of things need fixing up in these mountains." That's when I understood they didn't just want my tools and truck. They wanted to keep me alive, use my skills for their mountain survival operation. I'd become their personal mechanic, fixing their vehicles and maintaining their equipment while they continued hunting other workers who responded to fake emergency calls. I swung my biggest wrench at the nearest attacker, a thin man with rotted teeth. The tool connected with his temple in a wet crack that should have dropped him instantly. Instead, he stumbled but kept coming, blood streaming down his face while he laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. The children scattered and regrouped like a pack of wolves moving to flank my position. I grabbed my cordless drill from the tool bag and thumbed it to full speed, using the spinning bit as a weapon. When Sarah lunged at me with her homemade knife, I caught her arm with the drill bit, tearing through jacket and flesh. She screamed but didn't retreat, just switched the knife to her uninjured hand and kept attacking. Blood ran down her arm, soaking her sleeve, but she acted like it was nothing more than a mosquito bite. The husband grabbed my tool belt while I fought his wife, trying to steal my equipment even in the middle of the battle. I kicked him in the kneecap as hard as I could and heard bone crack like a branch breaking, but he just grunted and kept fighting. These people felt pain, but they weren't stopped by injuries that would disable normal humans. They'd been living wild so long they'd developed animal paw, intolerance, and pack-fighting instincts. One of the children, a boy who looked maybe 8 years old, bit my ankle through my work boot. His teeth punched right through the leather, drawing blood and making me stumble. I shook him off, but 2 more children grabbed my arms, their small hands surprisingly strong. I threw my heavy toolbox at the minivan's windshield, shattering the glass and creating enough distraction to break free from the kids. While they reacted to the noise, I dove into my truck cab and slammed the locks. They swarmed over my vehicle like angry insects, clawing at the windows with their fingernails and trying to puncture my tires with their knives. The husband climbed onto my hood and started pounding on the windshield with a rock, spiderweb cracks spreading across the glass. I started the engine and floored the gas pedal, feeling bodies bounce off my bumper as I accelerated. In my rearview mirror, I saw them pursuing on foot, running faster than any human should be able to move through mountain terrain. Their eyes glowed in my taillights like wild animals, and their mouths hung open in silent snarls. They chased me for at least 2 miles before finally giving up and melting back into the forest like they'd never been there at all. At the sheriff's station, I reported the attack, showing the deputies my torn clothes and bite marks. They took my statement seriously and sent units to investigate, but they found only the abandoned minivan with my scattered tools around it. The fake family had vanished completely, leaving behind just bloodstains on the gravel and claw marks on my truck. The deputies told me there had been other reports, missing contractors, plumbers who never came home from service calls, electricians whose trucks were found empty on remote mountain roads. But without bodies or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do except warn people to be careful about responding to emergency calls in isolated areas. I still run my mobile mechanic service, but I've made some changes. I require credit card deposits before responding to any remote calls, and I carry a .38 revolver in my tool belt now. I installed a dash camera and GPS tracker in my truck, and I never work alone after dark anymore. But I know they're still out there, still calling mechanics and plumbers and repairmen, still using fake emergencies to lure useful people to remote locations. They're adding skills to their feral mountain clan, one worker at a time, keeping the useful ones alive and leaving the rest for the forest to claim. So, if you ever get a desperate call about a stranded family in the mountains, make sure you verify who you're really helping before you load up your tools and drive into the darkness. Because sometimes the people who need rescuing aren't the ones making the call. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a hunting guide in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest for 15 years. I started when I was 17, learning from my dad who worked these mountains for 30 years before me. I know every trail, every ridge, every creek that runs through this wilderness. I can track a wounded deer for miles, read weather patterns 3 days out, and I've never lost a client in all my years guiding. But what happened in October 2023 in the Dolly Sods area changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. There are things living in these woods that aren't supposed to exist. I run Morrison Outdoor Adventures from a small office in Davis, West Virginia. Most of my business comes from city folks wanting to bag a black bear or white-tailed deer. I provide everything: licenses, gear, food, camping equipment. I've got a reputation for getting my clients their trophy, which is why I charge premium rates, $500 a day plus expenses. It's good money, especially during hunting season. October 15th, 2023, I got a call from a group of businessmen from Pittsburgh. 4 guys wanting a week-long black bear hunt. They were willing to pay top dollar, $3,500 total, for exclusive access to the remote areas. The leader, a man named Richards, said they wanted to get as far from civilization as possible. They'd heard about the Dolly Sods wilderness area and specifically requested that location. I should have been suspicious. Dolly Sods is beautiful, but it's not known for black bear. It's too high, too rocky. Most of the bears stay down in the valleys where the food is better, but the money was too good to turn down, and these guys seemed serious about hunting. They had top-of-the-line gear, expensive rifles, and they'd done their research on licenses and regulations. We met at my office on October 20th. Richards was about ifty, well-dressed, talked like he was used to giving orders. The other three, Morrison, Bennett, and Walsh, seemed to be his employees or business partners. They drove matching black SUVs and wore identical hunting outfits that still had the tags on them. City hunters, no question, but their money was real. I loaded my pickup with supplies, food for 6 days, camping gear, my father's old Coleman lanterns, a two-way radio system, first aid kit, GPS units, and my hunting rifles. I always carry my grandfather's 30-06 and a newer 308 with a night vision scope. The forecast showed clear weather, temperatures in the 40s at night, perfect hunting conditions. The drive to Dolly Sods takes about 2 hours from Davis. We followed Forest Service Road 75 until it ended, then hiked in another 4 miles to reach the plateau. The area is like being on another planet. Wide open grasslands at 4,000 feet elevation, surrounded by dense forest. Wind blows constantly up there, and the silence can drive you crazy if you're not used to it. We set up camp near Bare Rocks, a pile of massive boulders that provides shelter from the wind. I've camped there dozens of times with other clients. It's a good base camp with clear sight lines in all directions and fresh water from a nearby stream. The clients seemed happy with the location, taking pictures with their phones and talking about how remote they felt. That first night went fine. We saw some deer sign, found old bear scratches on trees, though they looked strange, too high up, too deep. I mentioned it to Richards, but he just nodded and said bears could be bigger than people expected. We turned in early, planning to start hunting at dawn. October 21st started normal. We broke camp at first light and headed into the forest below the plateau. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. In 15 years of guiding, I'd never heard silence like that. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Even the wind seemed muffled once we got under the tree canopy. Around 10 a.m., Bennett found tracks that made my blood run cold. They were near the stream, pressed deep into the mud. At first glance, they looked human. 5 toes, heel impression, the right size. But something was wrong. The toes were too long, ending in what looked like claw marks. The prints were massive, at least 14 inches long and 6 inches wide. "What kind of bear makes tracks like that?" Walsh asked, kneeling down for a closer look. "I've seen thousands of bear tracks. These weren't from any bear. The stride length was wrong too, about 4 feet between prints, like something walking upright. But there were other prints nearby, smaller ones, showing whatever made them had dropped to all fours at some point. "Maybe a person with big boots?" Richard suggested, but his voice sounded uncertain. I pulled out my field guide and measuring tape. The tracks didn't match anything in the book. Worse, they were fresh, maybe 6 hours old, and they seemed to be following our trail from the previous day, like something had been tracking us while we slept. We followed the tracks for about a mile. They led deeper into the forest, toward an area I'd never explored. The trees got thicker, older, blocking out most of the sunlight. My GPS started acting up, showing our location jumping around randomly. The two-way radio filled with static. "Equipment problems," I told the clients, trying to sound calm. "Happens sometimes in the mountains." But I'd used the same GPS and radio for 3 years without issues. They'd worked fine the day before. Around noon, we found more tracks. A whole group of them this time, different sizes. Some looked like they came from children, if children had claws instead of toenails. The tracks circled a small clearing, then headed off in different directions like a pack splitting up to hunt. That's when Morrison pointed to a tree about 20 feet away. "What the hell did that?" The oak tree was maybe 2 feet thick, solid hardwood. Something had clawed it, leaving deep gouges running from about 7 feet high down to the ground. The marks were fresh, sap still bleeding from the cuts. It would take incredible strength to dig that deep into living wood. "Grizzly bear," I said. "Though we don't have grizzlies in West Virginia. Black bears don't have claws that long or that strong." "Those claw marks are in sets of 5, Bennett said quietly. "Bears have 4 claws." He was right. Each set of gouges showed 5 parallel lines, like fingers. Human fingers, but with claws instead of nails. We decided to head back to camp. The clients were getting nervous, and honestly, so was I. Nothing about this felt right. The forest stayed silent as we hiked back, but I had the constant feeling we were being watched. Several times I caught movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. Back at camp, my equipment problems got worse. The GPS showed we were in 3 different locations depending on which unit I checked. The radio picked up voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual, but the compass was spinning randomly. "Maybe we should head back early," Walsh suggested. "This doesn't feel like good hunting." But Richards wanted to stay. He'd paid good money for a week-long hunt and wasn't leaving empty-handed. The others seemed to follow his lead, though they kept looking over their shoulders. That night, as we sat around the campfire, the howling started. It began around 9 p.m., just as full darkness settled over the plateau. At first, it sounded like wolves, which would be unusual but not impossible. Wolves had been reintroduced to some parts of West Virginia. But as I listened closer, something was wrong with the sound. The howls had a human quality to them, like someone trying to imitate a wolf, but not quite getting it right. They were too long, too controlled, and they seemed to be coming from multiple directions, circling our camp. "Coyotes," I told the clients, but coyotes don't sound like that, either. The howling continued for about an hour, getting closer. My night vision scope showed movement in the tree line, but nothing clear enough to identify. Just shapes moving between the trees, sometimes upright, sometimes on all fours. Around 11 p.m., the sounds stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the howling, complete quiet, like the entire forest was holding its breath. That's when we heard the sniffing. Something was moving around our camp just outside the firelight. Loud, deliberate sniffing, like a dog investigating a new scent. But the sound was too big, too deep. Whatever was out there was huge. "Stay calm," I whispered, checking the safety on my rifle. "Keep the fire going." The sniffing continued for maybe 20 minutes, moving in a circle around us. Sometimes it stopped, and we'd hear what sounded like whispered conversation. Not words we could understand, but definitely communication. Intelligent communication. Around 2 a.m., they stepped into the light. There were 8 of them, and they moved like they owned the forest. The leader was clearly once human, but something had changed him into a nightmare. He walked upright on 2 legs, but his body was covered in thick, dark fur. His face had stretched into something between human and wolf, with the elongated jaw full of sharp teeth. But his eyes were still human, still intelligent. "Hunters," he said, and his voice was like gravel mixed with growling. "You hunt in our territory now." The others spread out behind him. Men, women, even what looked like children, all in various stages of the same impossible transformation. Some had wolf ears growing from their skulls. Others had extended snouts and fangs. Their hands ended in claws, but they held crude spears and knives like humans would. Richards tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. What are you?" "We were like you once," the leader continued, stepping closer to our fire, "until the mountain gave us a better way to hunt." A woman moved into the light next to him. Half her face was human, the other half covered in fur with a wolf's ear. When she spoke, her words were slurred by an extended jaw. "The change comes slow," she explained, "but it comes to all who stay." She showed us bite marks on her arms that were clearly healing, explaining how the transformation spreads. "First the hunger," she said, "then the strength, then the shape begins to shift, then the pack calls." One of the children, though it was hard to think of them as children anymore, demonstrated their speed by climbing a nearby tree like a squirrel. They moved with impossible agility. their human intelligence enhanced by animal instincts. Better than being weak humans, the child growled when it came back down. Stronger, faster, never hungry, never afraid. That's when I realized this wasn't just physical transformation. Their minds had been altered too. They preferred this existence, chose it over being human. Mountain spirits reward those who embrace the old ways, the leader explained. Punish those who resist. They offered us a choice: join the pack willingly or be converted through bites and blood. The alternative was death, but not a quick one. Walsh tried to run. They brought him down like actual wolves, tearing at his throat with fangs that had once been human teeth. I watched in horror as they fed on him while he was still alive, their human minds directing animal savagery. While they were distracted, I grabbed my rifle and fired directly into the leader's chest. The bullet hit, and black blood leaked from the wound, but he just laughed. The hole was already beginning to heal before my eyes. "Your turn," he said, taking a step toward me. I emptied my magazine into them, hitting several, but not stopping. Any permanently. They seemed to feel pain but recover instantly, like their bodies had adapted beyond normal human limitations. The woman cornered me against a tree, her claws extending, from fingers that were no longer fully human. "Don't fight it," she whispered. "Embrace what you could become." I pulled my hunting knife and slashed her throat. She just grinned as the wound closed within seconds. That's when I set fire to our supplies. The camping gear, food, everything went up in flames, creating enough smoke and chaos to break through their circle. They chased me through the forest for hours, howling and calling my name in voices both human and animal. Every time I thought I'd lost them, I'd hear their inhuman laughter echoing from the trees around me. They could have caught me easily. They were faster, stronger, knew the woods better. But I think they were playing with me, enjoying the hunt. I reached my truck as dawn broke, and they stopped at the tree line like sunlight burned them. In my rearview mirror, I saw them watching me leave, their glowing eyes promising they'd remember my scent. Park rangers found the campsite destroyed, and my clients remained scattered like they'd been fed to wild animals. The official report blamed a bear attack, but I know what really happened in those mountains. I quit guiding and moved to Florida 6 months later. Got a job at a marina as far from the mountains as I could get. But sometimes I still dream about howling voices calling me home. And lately, I've been having dreams where I'm running on all fours through the forest, finally free and wild. The transformation they offered haunts me. Part of me understands why someone would choose that power, that freedom from human weakness. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I catch myself howling along with the wind. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been a freelance photographer for 12 years. I specialize in underground cave systems for magazines like National Geographic and Outside. I've rappelled into sinkholes in Mexico, mapped ice caves in Alaska, and spent weeks in the deepest parts of Mammoth Cave. I thought I'd seen everything the underground world had to offer. But what happened in March 2024 in the Cumberland Cave System in Tennessee changed everything I thought I knew about what lives beneath our feet. Some places underground aren't meant for human eyes, and some people who go down there never really come back up. The call came on a Tuesday morning. National Geographic wanted a photo essay on unexplored sections of the Cumberland Cave System. The assignment was perfect for me. Document previously unmapped passages and capture the raw beauty of untouched underground spaces. The pay was good, and I'd been wanting to explore Tennessee's cave networks for years. My spelunking partner, Mike Rodriguez, had been mapping these caves for 15 years. He worked for the Tennessee Cave Survey and knew routes that weren't on any official maps yet. Mike was the kind of guy who could navigate cave systems in complete darkness, just by feeling air currents and listening to how sounds bounced off walls. He'd discovered 12 new cave systems in the past 5 years alone. We loaded up our gear at his cabin: professional cave photography equipment, LED lighting rigs, climbing harnesses, ropes, first aid supplies, and enough food and water for a week underground. My camera equipment alone weighed 40 pounds. Mike had his surveying tools, GPS units, and detailed topographic maps of the area. "These passages go deeper than most people think," Mike told me as we checked our equipment. Some of them connect to cave systems that run for hundreds of miles underground. The limestone here is perfect for creating huge chambers. The weather was perfect for caving. No rain in the forecast, which meant no flooding risk. We drove to the cave entrance early Wednesday morning. The opening was hidden behind a curtain of thick vegetation, just a dark crack in the hillside that most people would walk right past. Mike had been down this particular system dozens of times, but always through the main passages. This time, we were exploring side tunnels that he'd marked on previous trips, but never fully investigated. The plan was to map these new areas and get photographs for the magazine. The first day went exactly as planned. We rappelled down the main entrance and started working our way through familiar passages. The caves were beautiful, flowstone formations, underground pools of crystal clear water, and limestone walls carved smooth by thousands of years of water flow. My camera captured everything perfectly under the LED lights. But on the third day, that's when we found the passages that changed everything. We were about 300 feet underground when Mike noticed something strange. The passage we were following suddenly got much wider. Not naturally wider, artificially wider. Someone had been digging. "Sarah, look at this," Mike said, running his flashlight along the walls. "These are tool marks, fresh ones." I set up my camera to document what we'd found. The walls showed clear evidence of excavation, pick marks, shovel scrapes, and areas where rock had been deliberately removed. The work looked professional, like someone who knew what they were doing underground. "Who would be digging down here?" I asked. "And why?" Mike shook his head. "No permits have been issued for any work in this system. This is all protected land. Nobody should be digging here at all." We followed the widened passage deeper into the cave. Every 50 feet or so, we found evidence of human modification. Support timbers had been installed in weak areas. Drainage channels had been carved to redirect water flow. Someone had spent months, maybe years, working down here. The deeper we went, the more extensive the modifications became. We found sleeping areas carved into the walls, lined with old blankets and sleeping bags. Food storage areas had been hollowed out and lined with plastic sheeting. Someone wasn't just working down here, they were living here. But the weird part was the location. We were now 400 feet underground, in passages that had no natural entrance large enough for equipment. How had anyone gotten construction tools down here? How were they getting food and supplies to these depths? "Mike, this doesn't make sense," I said, photographing another artificial chamber. "Look at the size of this space. They would have had to remove tons of rock. Where did it all go?" Mike was studying his maps, looking confused. "According to the survey data, this chamber shouldn't exist. We're in solid limestone here. It should be solid rock for another 100 feet down." That's when we found the first shed skin. The skin was hanging from a wooden peg driven into the cave wall like someone had peeled it off and hung it up to dry. At first, I thought it was some kind of animal hide. But when I got closer with my flashlight, I realized what I was looking at. It was human skin. Pale, translucent, and completely hairless. But it wasn't normal human skin. It was too thick, too rubbery, and it had a strange phosphorescent quality that made it glow faintly in the dark. "What the hell is that?" Mike whispered. I started taking pictures, my hands shaking slightly. "I think it's shed skin. Like a snake, but from a person," Mike finished. We found more of them as we explored deeper. Dozens of shed skins in various sizes, some clearly from children. They were all hung up carefully, like they were valuable somehow. The skin samples I photographed showed clear signs of adaptation, thicker in some areas with what looked like sensory organs developed along the fingertips and palms. The pictographs started appearing shortly after that. The cave walls were covered with crude drawings made with some kind of phosphorescent paint that glowed dimly in our flashlight beams. The pictures told a story. Surface humans being pulled down into holes in the ground. Groups of people living in underground chambers. And most disturbing, the gradual transformation of normal humans into something else. The later pictographs showed people with enlarged eyes, elongated limbs, and pale skin that glowed like the shed skins we'd found. They moved through cave passages with fluid swimming motions. They hunted in packs, and they fed on stone and minerals. "Sarah, we need to document this and get out of here," Mike said, but his voice sounded strange, distant. I looked at him with my flashlight. His pupils were dilated much wider than they should be, even in the darkness. When had that started happening? That's when we heard the voices. The sounds came from deeper in the cave system. Multiple people talking, but not in any language I recognized. It was a mixture of clicking sounds, whistles, and distorted human speech that echoed strangely through the passages. "Surface walkers," a voice called out clearly from the darkness ahead. "We smell surface walkers." Mike and I froze. Someone was down here with us, and they knew we were coming. "Should we go back?" I whispered. But Mike was already moving forward, drawn by something I couldn't understand. His movements looked different, more fluid, like he was swimming through the air instead of walking. "Mike, wait," I called, but he disappeared around a bend in the passage. I followed, and that's when I saw the settlement. The passage opened into a massive natural cavern, easily the size of a football stadium. But it wasn't natural anymore. The entire space had been modified into an underground city. Crude shelters were built into the cave walls. Walkways had been carved at different levels, connected by rope bridges and wooden ladders, underground. Gardens grew in terraced areas, filled with pale, mushroom-like plants that provided their own dim light. And everywhere, moving through this underground world, were the people. They had once been human, I could tell that much. But they'd changed. Their skin was pale gray with that same phosphorescent glow we'd seen on the shed skins. Their eyes had grown larger and turned completely white, no pupils visible at all. Their limbs were elongated and seemed to bend in ways that human joints shouldn't allow. They moved through the cave passages like they were swimming, flowing around obstacles and climbing vertical walls with impossible ease. When they saw our lights, they gathered around us in a circle, clicking and whistling to each other. "New surface walkers," one of them said in heavily accented English. "Been long time since new surface walkers come down." The one who spoke appeared to be their leader, a woman who might have been in her 50s, though it was hard to tell with her transformed features. Her elongated limbs moved with graceful precision, and her white eyes seemed to track our movements perfectly, despite having no visible pupils. "I am Deep Mother," she said. "Been underground 40 seasons of dark. You come down to join Adapted Ones?" Deep Mother led us through their settlement, explaining how they'd built their civilization in the cave systems. They'd been down here for decades, she said, refugees from the surface world who had come underground to escape what she called the burning sky. Surface world ending, she explained, pointing up toward where we'd come from. Poison air, burning weather, sky fire from machines. Mountains opened up to swallow us safe. Their society was completely adapted to cave life. They'd learned to grow food in the darkness using bioluminescent fungi. They'd tapped into underground water sources and created complex irrigation systems. Most importantly, they'd learned to supplement their diet with minerals and stone. Adapted ones not need much food like surface walkers, Deep Mother said. We eat stone, drink mineral water, grow strong in the dark. The children born down here looked barely human anymore. They had oversized skulls to house enlarged brains and completely white, pupilless eyes that could see perfectly in absolute darkness. Their limbs were so elongated that they moved through narrow passages like liquid, flowing around obstacles that would trap a normal person. I watched them demonstrate their abilities, echolocating like bats, navigating complex cave systems in complete darkness, and communicating through ultrasonic clicks and whistles that I could barely hear. But the most disturbing part was the collection chambers. Deep Mother showed us rooms filled with surface artifacts, clothes, electronics, personal belongings, and identification cards from dozens of missing people. Others come down, she said matter-of-factly. Some adapt quickly, some take longer. Some never adapt and become stone. She led us to another chamber where I saw what she meant. Human remains were embedded in the cave walls, partially mineralized like they were slowly turning to stone themselves. The bones had a crystalline structure as if the people had been absorbing cave minerals until their skeletons became part of the rock formation itself. Adaptation painful at first, Deep Mother admitted. But then you're never hungry, never cold, never afraid of dark. Underground is forever. Surface world is dying. That's when I realized Mike was already changing. Mike's transformation had been happening gradually over our 3 days underground, but I hadn't noticed until now. His pupils had dilated so much that his eyes looked almost completely black. His skin was developing pale patches that had a faintness and phosphorescent glow. Most disturbing, he was moving differently, more fluid, more comfortable in the narrow passages. "I can see everything down here," he whispered to me, his voice taking on the same clicking quality as the adapted ones. "The rocks are alive, Sarah. The caves are calling to me." Deep Mother nodded approvingly. "Your friend adapts quickly. Strong blood for underground life. He will make good adapted one." She explained the conversion process to me in clinical detail. First, the eyes changed, pupils dilating permanently to gather maximum light until the iris disappeared completely. Then the skin adapted, losing pigmentation and developing the phosphorescent quality that helped them navigate in darkness. The bones became more flexible, joints more fluid, to navigate tight cave passages. Most disturbing was the dietary adaptation. Their digestive systems evolved to process cave minerals and underground fungi. They could literally eat stone and extract nutrients from limestone and other cave minerals. "Painful at first," Deep Mother repeated, "but necessary for survival. Surface world ending soon. Better to evolve than die with dying world." The children born in the caves demonstrated abilities that seemed impossible. They could squeeze through gaps barely 6 inches wide, climb sheer rock walls like spiders, and navigate complex cave networks in complete darkness using only echolocation. "Your friend will adapt quickly," Deep Mother said, looking at Mike with approval. Already showing good signs. Eyes changing, skin responding. Few more days, and he ready for full adaptation process. I tried to convince Mike to leave with me, to return to the surface. But he resisted, saying the thought of sunlight hurt his changing eyes. He was already too far along in the process. "You don't understand," he told me, his voice now clicking and whistling like theirs. "Up there is death. Down here is life. Evolution. We become what humans need to become to survive." The adapted ones didn't try to stop me from leaving. They knew Mike was already too changed to return to surface life, and they seemed confident that I would eventually come back. "Surface world ending soon," Deep Mother said as I prepared to leave alone. "When burning sky gets too hot, when poison air gets too thick, you remember the way down. Adapted ones will be here. Evolution will be here." I made it back to the surface alone, following the route markers Mike and I had placed on our way down. It took me 8 hours of climbing and crawling through passages that seemed much more difficult without Mike's help. My equipment felt impossibly heavy, and several times I had to abandon gear to squeeze through narrow sections. When I finally emerged from the cave entrance, the sunlight was blinding. My eyes, which had spent 3 days adapting to darkness, couldn't handle the brightness. I sat in the shade for an hour, just trying to readjust to surface life. Mike's truck was still parked where we'd left it, but his personal gear was gone. His wallet, keys, and cell phone were sitting on the dashboard like he'd deliberately left them behind. The search teams found no trace of him when I reported him missing. I tried to tell the authorities what I'd found underground, but my story was dismissed as a stress reaction to my partner's disappearance. Cave-related missing person cases happen frequently, they said. People get disoriented underground, take wrong turns, become trapped in unexplored passages. The caves are searched, but the systems are so complex that bodies are rarely recovered. My photographs told a different story, but when I developed them, most had come out strangely distorted. The images of the adapted ones were blurred and unclear, like they couldn't be properly captured on film. The pictures of their underground settlement looked like natural cave formations, unless you knew exactly what to look for. National Geographic published my article about discovering modified cave passages, but they edited out all references to the adapted people. The official story was that we'd found evidence of historical cave occupation, possibly by escaped slaves or hermits from the 1800s. The shed skins and phosphorescent markings were explained as natural cave formations that had been misidentified in poor lighting conditions. That was 6 months ago. I haven't been back underground since, and I've stopped taking cave photography assignments. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about the clicking voices and the phosphorescent glow of adapted skin. Other cavers have started reporting strange encounters in Tennessee cave systems, glimpses of pale figures moving through distant passages, sounds of clicking and whistling coming from unexplored chambers, equipment found abandoned in deep cave sections with no explanation of how it got there. A few have reported seeing a figure with elongated limbs and glowing skin, deep in the cave systems, moving with impossible fluid grace through passages too narrow for normal humans. The figure appears to be guiding lost cavers toward deeper passages, leading them down to places they were never meant to go. I think it's Mike. I think he's still down there, fully adapted now, helping to recruit new members for their underground society. And I think Deep Mother was right about the surface world. Climate change is accelerating. Air pollution is getting worse. The temperatures keep rising. Sometimes I find myself wondering if the adapted ones chose correctly, if evolution underground really is better than extinction on the surface. But I'm not ready to go back down. Not yet. Though lately I've been having trouble with bright lights, and sometimes in complete darkness, I swear I can see better than I should be able to. My dreams are full of clicking voices, calling me home to the deep places where adapted humans wait in the phosphorescent darkness, ready to welcome another surface dweller into their underground world. The caves are patient. They can wait for me to make my choice. After all, the surface world is ending, and evolution is forever. My name is David Mitchell, and I've been working for the Kentucky Forest Service for 12 years. I started as a basic ranger right after college, worked my way up through fire prevention, trail maintenance, and wildlife management. For the past 5 years, I've specialized in population surveys, counting deer, tracking bear movements, cataloging bird species for environmental impact studies. I've spent weeks alone in remote forests, slept in my truck during thunderstorms, and handled everything from aggressive wildlife to getting lost in unmarked terrain. But what happened in September 2023 at Red River Gorge changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in Kentucky's wilderness. Some things in the forest have been watching us, learning from us, and they've gotten very good at pretending to be human. The assignment seemed routine when my supervisor handed me the paperwork. The state needed a comprehensive wildlife survey of a 12-square-mile section of Red River Gorge for some development project. Standard stuff: GPS tracking routes, population counts, habitat assessment, the works. I loaded my Ford F-150 with survey equipment, camping gear, and enough food for 2 weeks. My radio, GPS unit, and tablet were all fully charged and tested. The weather forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, mild temperatures, minimal rain expected. Red River Gorge is beautiful country, but it's also remote and challenging. The terrain is rocky sandstone cliffs, dense hardwood forests, and winding creek valleys. Cell phone coverage is spotty at best, which is why we rely on radio communication with the district office. I've worked this area before, know most of the trails and landmarks. The wildlife is typical for eastern Kentucky: white-tailed deer, black bear, wild turkey, various songbirds, and raptors. Occasionally you'll see a bobcat or coyote, but nothing dangerous if you follow proper protocols. I set up my base camp at a clearing about 3 miles from the main road, following standard procedures. Tent positioned with clear sight lines, food stored properly in bear-proof containers, radio antenna positioned for best signal strength. My survey grid covered sections labeled A through J, each requiring a full day of walking transects with GPS coordinates recorded every 100 meters. I'd photograph animal signs, record population estimates, note any unusual behavior or habitat changes. The first week went exactly as expected. My daily routine started at dawn with coffee and equipment checks, then hiking pre-planned routes with my tablet and GPS unit. I'd see normal deer behavior: does with fawns feeding in meadows, bucks marking territory, standard herd movements. Black bears kept their distance when they detected me, which is normal. Bird populations seemed healthy, with good variety of species and normal nesting activity. Every evening, I'd radio my progress to the district office, download GPS data to my tablet, and update my survey notes. But Thursday of the second week, something changed. I started noticing the deer weren't running when I approached. They'd look at me with this intense stare, heads tilted at odd angles, but they wouldn't move. A doe and 2 fawns watched me from maybe 20 feet away for almost 10 minutes, just staring. When I took pictures, they didn't even blink at the camera flash. Birds were acting strange too. Crows and ravens perched in trees along my route, following my progress like they were tracking me. I've never seen wildlife behavior like that in 12 years of forest work. That afternoon, I found a campsite that looked recently abandoned, but something felt wrong about the whole setup. The tents were positioned correctly for the terrain and weather, guy lines properly tensioned, equipment arranged, efficiently. But everything was too perfect. The sleeping bags were laid out with military precision, personal items arranged like a museum display. Camp chairs faced the fire ring at exact angles, cooking gear stacked with mathematical precision. No one camps that neatly, especially after several days in the wilderness. I called out several times, following protocol for contacting other forest users. "Hello, anyone here? This is David with the Forest Service." My voice echoed off the surrounding cliffs, but I got no response. Not even normal forest sounds. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no wind through the leaves. Just silence that felt heavy and unnatural, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I had the strong feeling I was being watched from multiple directions, but I couldn't spot anyone or anything when I turned around. That evening back at my own camp, I heard my name being called from different directions in the forest. "David! David, where are you?" The voice sounded exactly like my supervisor, Jim Crawford, calling me on the radio. Same tone, same inflection he uses when he needs an urgent status update. But when I checked my radio, it was completely quiet. No incoming transmissions, battery fully charged, antenna positioned correctly. I responded anyway, thinking maybe the radio was malfunctioning. "This is David, reading you, Jim. What's your status?" Silence. Then I heard the voice again, but this time from behind me, deeper in the forest. "David, need your location, son. Important update from district office." Same voice, same words Jim would use, but my radio still showed no activity. I realized something in these woods had been listening to my daily radio communications, learning the voices and phrases we use. Something was copying Jim's voice perfectly, trying to get me to leave my campsite and follow it into the darkness. Friday morning, I woke up to my own voice calling for help from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Help me! Anyone out there? I'm trapped!" It was my exact voice, my accent, even the way I pronounce cert, ain words. I followed the sound, thinking maybe I was having some kind of breakdown, hearing things. The calls led me about a quarter mile from camp to a steep ravine where I saw myself trapped under a fallen log. The person under the log looked exactly like me. Same brown hair, same beard, same Forest Service uniform with my name tag and badge number. "Thank God you found me," it said in my voice. "Been trapped here all night. Can you lift this log?" But as I got closer, the details became wrong. The eyes were too glassy, too fixed, like a taxidermy animal. The facial expressions didn't match the emotional content of what it was saying. When I backed away, it stopped crying for help and smiled at me with too many teeth, more than any human mouth should hold. More voices started calling from the forest around me. "David, over here!" That was my wife Sarah's voice, exactly as she sounds when she calls me for dinner. "David, son, we need to talk." My mother's voice, with the concerned tone she uses for serious family discussions. "Mitchell, get over here now." My old drill instructor from basic training, using my last name like he always did. All of them begging for help, claiming to be lost or hurt or scared. I saw them through the trees as I backed toward my camp. Perfect copies of people I knew, wearing their faces and clothes down to the smallest details. But they moved wrong, like marionettes controlled by someone who'd never seen humans walk. They mimicked voices, mannerisms, even clothing perfectly, but they couldn't copy emotions correctly. Their facial expressions were masks over something hungry and predatory. "David," Sarah's voice called sweetly from behind a large oak tree. "Why won't you help us? We're hurt and scared, and we need you." I knew my wife was safely at home in Lexington, probably getting ready for work at the hospital. But the copy was visual, utterly perfect except for the eyes, cold and calculating instead of warm and loving. They all had those same dead, hungry eyes. I climbed the tallest tree I could find to observe them from above, and that's when I saw the horrible truth of what they really were. When they thought I couldn't see them clearly, they dropped their human disguises and revealed their true forms. They were something like pale, elongated humans, but their joints bent in directions that human anatomy doesn't allow. Their skin seemed to shift and flow like water, constantly changing texture and color. Their real faces were completely blank and featureless, just smooth skin with black holes where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. No expression, no emotion, nothing human at all. They communicated by touching their fingertips together, sharing information through physical contact like some kind of hive mind network. I watched them practice being human, copying movements and expressions they'd absorbed from previous encounters. One of them wore a Kentucky State Parks ranger uniform that looked familiar. Another was dressed like a lost hiker with expensive camping gear. They'd been studying humans who entered their territory, learning to mimic us perfectly to lure more prey. The abandoned campsite I'd found was their laboratory, stolen gear they used to understand human behavior and practice our mannerisms. I realized they'd probably replaced missing campers and hikers over the years, sending perfect copies home to unsuspecting families. How many missing persons reports were actually these things integrating into human society? How many families were living with flawless imitations of their loved ones? They surrounded my tree, each one wearing a different face I recognized. My wife, my parents, co-workers from the Forest Service, friends from high school. "Come down, David," they called in perfect unison, using multiple voices at once. "We just want to understand how you work inside. We want to learn to be you, better than you can be yourself." Their voices were perfect imitations, but the fact that they all spoke at exactly the same time revealed their hive mind nature. I tried to radio for help, but heard my own voice responding on the channel, telling district office that everything was fine. Survey proceeding on schedule, no assistance needed. They'd learned to mimic radio communications, potentially intercepting all my calls for help over the past 2 weeks. When I climbed higher in the tree, they began climbing after me with impossible flexibility and speed. Their limbs stretched and contorted to follow, revealing they weren't bound by human physical limitations. Joints that shouldn't bend, fingers that extended like rubber, movements that defied gravity and anatomy. I broke off branches and threw them down, but the mimics just laughed with stolen voices from my childhood, my marriage, my military service. "We studied you for days, David," they said in chorus, using my mother's voice mixed with my wife's. "We know everything about David Mitchell, how he thinks, what he fears, what he loves. We can be him better than he knows how to be himself." One of them, wearing my exact face, explained they would replace me, live my life, love my wife, do my job, and no one would ever know the difference. I jumped from tree to tree while they flowed through the forest below like water, their forms constantly shifting to track my movement. They tried to confuse me by mimicking my voice, giving me false directions and fake encouragement. "This way, David," they called using my own voice. "Safe path home. Trust yourself." Using my own words and inflections against me, trying to get me to climb down into their reach. I reached my truck, but found another perfect copy of myself already sitting in the driver's seat. It waved at me with my own mannerisms, smiled with my smile, wore my wedding ring on the correct finger. The keys were still hanging from my belt, so I knew this wasn't the real vehicle. I smashed the passenger window with a large rock and fought my own double inside the cab. Fighting myself was like wrestling with liquid that had somehow learned to hold human shape. When I hit it, the impact felt wrong, like punching thick mud that immediately reformed. It dissolved when I struck it hard enough, then reformed seconds later with my face perfectly restored. No damage, no pain response, just that hungry smile wearing my features. I managed to start the truck and drive toward the main road while my duplicate ran alongside the vehicle, easily matching my speed of 30 miles per hour through rough terrain. In my mirrors, I could see the entire colony following. Dozens of shapes that flowed between human and their true forms, keeping pace with my truck like some kind of nightmare parade. At the Forest Service District office, I couldn't trust anyone. Any coworker could be a replaced mimic. Any supervisor could be one of them wearing a familiar face. I turned in my equipment, submitted a basic survey report claiming equipment failures had cut the assignment short, and put in for immediate resignation. Jim Crawford seemed normal, but those eyes, were they a little too glassy? Was his smile a little too wide? I moved to Oregon 2 weeks later, changed my name, and took a job with a private environmental consulting firm. I don't work alone in remote areas anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I look in the mirror and wonder if the David typing this story is really me, or just a perfect copy with borrowed memories who thinks he escaped from Red River Gorge. Sometimes I catch my reflection smiling when I'm not trying to smile, and I remember those hungry eyes watching from the Kentucky wilderness, learning to be human better than humans know how to be themselves. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I've been an EMT for 8 years in rural North Carolina. I work the mountain routes, covering everything from Boone up to the Tennessee border, including all those tiny communities scattered through the Blue Ridge Mountains. Most people think being an EMT is all about car accidents and heart attacks, but when you work the backwoods like I do, you see everything. Hunting accidents, snake bites, folks who've been living off the grid so long they forgot how to use a phone. I've delivered babies in pickup trucks and talked jumpers down from cliff edges. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened in October 2023 near Grandfather Mountain showed me there are worse things than death waiting in those dark hollows between the peaks. The call came in around 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was restocking the ambulance at our station in Banner Elk when dispatch crackled through the radio. Unit 47, we have a family emergency at 1847 Ridgeline Trail. Caller reports multiple family members in medical distress. Sounds pretty shook up. My partner Tom grabbed the radio. He'd been doing this job for 15 years, twice as long as me. Copy dispatch. What's the nature of the medical emergency? Caller was difficult to understand. Something about her children changing and needing immediate help. She was pretty hysterical. Kept saying they were all sick. Tom and I looked at each other. Hysterical callers usually meant overdoses or psychiatric episodes. But way out on Ridgeline Trail? That was serious backcountry, the kind of place where people went to disappear. The drive took 45 minutes on winding mountain roads that got narrower with every mile. Our GPS lost signal after the first 20 minutes, and we had to follow Tom's hand-drawn directions from dispatch. The trees got thicker, the houses got further apart, and the pavement gave way to grave, then dirt. "You ever been out this far?" Tom asked, nursing the ambulance around another hairpin turn. "Once. Drug bust about 3 years ago. Guy was running a meth lab in an old tobacco barn." I checked our equipment one more time. "Radio's getting weak." Tom tried to raise dispatch. Nothing but static. "We're in a dead zone. Happens a lot up here. The mountains block everything." When we finally found 1847 Ridgeline Trail, I understood why the caller sounded scared. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by thick woods, no other houses in sight. It looked like it had been built in the 1970s and barely maintained since. The only light came from candles flickering in the windows. "Power's out," Tom said, grabbing his medical bag. "Or they don't have power to begin with." I slung my kit over my shoulder. "A lot of folks up here live completely off-grid." We knocked on the front door and called out, identifying ourselves as EMTs responding to a 911 call. No answer. Tom tried the handle, unlocked. "Hello? EMT services, we're here to help." The smell hit us first. Something sweet and rotten, like meat left in the sun mixed with something metallic. Blood. The living room looked like a tornado had gone through it. Furniture was overturned. There were dark stains on the walls, and scratches gouged deep into the wooden doorframe. In the corner, a woman sat in a rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth. Her long hair hung down, covering her face. "Ma'am, I'm Rebecca. I'm an EMT. You called for help?" She looked up, and I had to fight not to step backward. Her eyes were completely black. Not just the iris, but the whole eye, like someone had filled them with ink. Her skin was gray and waxy, and when she smiled, I could see her teeth had grown longer and sharper. "They started eating everything," she whispered in a voice like sandpaper. "First the meat in the freezer, and they gnawed the wood off the chairs, then—" She giggled, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Then they started eating each other." Tom moved closer, pulling out his flashlight. "Ma'am, I need to check your vital signs. Can you tell me your name?" "Linda. Linda Hartwell. My husband got bit by something in the woods 3 days ago. Something that looked like a person, but wasn't. Then he bit the kids. Then he bit me." She held up her arms, and I could see dozens of bite marks covering her skin. But they weren't healing right. Instead of scabs, there were black, crusty patches that looked infected. I knelt beside her and checked her pulse. It was racing, over 200 beats per minute. Her skin was ice cold but clammy with sweat. "We heard movement from upstairs," she said, tilting her head like she was listening. "That's them, my family. They're different now, like me. Always hungry, always so hungry, but nothing fills us up anymore." As if on cue, we heard footsteps above us. Multiple people walking back and forth, but their steps were perfectly synchronized, like they were marching together. "How many people are upstairs?" Tom asked, checking his equipment. "My husband Jake and our twins, Bobby and Sarah. They're 8. Linda's black eyes fixed on me. "The hunger makes you strong, stronger than you ever were before. And it spreads through bites, but once it starts, you can't stop biting. The hunger never goes away." Tom headed for the stairs. "I'm going to check on your family, ma'am. Rebecca, you stay with her." "Tom, wait!" But he was already climbing the wooden steps. I tried to take Linda's blood pressure, but when I wrapped the cuff around her arm, she grabbed my wrist with strength that should have been impossible for someone her size. Her fingers felt like steel cables. "It makes you so much better," she said urgently. "No more tired, no more weak, no more scared of anything, just hungry, always hungry. And when you bite someone, they become hungry too, and then you're not alone anymore." From upstairs, I heard Tom call out, "Hello? I'm an EMT. Here to help!" Then he screamed. The scream cut off suddenly, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. "Tom!" I shouted, but Linda's grip tightened on my wrist. "Too late," she whispered. "He smells so good. Fresh blood, unbitten. They've been waiting for new meat." 3 people came down the stairs, moving in perfect unison, like they were connected by invisible strings. A man and 2 children, but they walked wrong. Too fluid, too coordinated, like a single organism controlling 3 bodies. They had the same gray skin as Linda, the same black eyes, but they looked stronger, healthier. The man wore a flannel shirt that was torn and blood-stained. The children, twins, a boy and a girl, had grown out of their clothes, their muscles unnaturally developed. "New person," the man said in a voice that sounded like metal grinding against metal. "Fresh, unbitten, full of good meat." The children flanked me while their parents blocked the exits. They moved with the coordination of a hunting pack, cutting off every escape route without speaking to each other. I could see Tom's EMT jacket at the top of the stairs, torn and bloody, but no Tom. "The hunger never stops," Linda explained, still holding my wrist. "We ate all the food in the house first. Then we chewed the wood off the furniture, then the drywall, then the insulation. But it's never enough. We need meat, live meat." I looked around and realized she was right. Chunks were missing from the wooden table legs, the chair arms, even the walls themselves. They'd been gnawed by human teeth. "You help sick people," the man said, his black eyes studying me like I was a medical specimen. We show you new kind of health, better than old weakness. Their fingernails had grown long and black, sharp as claws. When they smiled, I could see their teeth had changed too, still human-shaped, but longer, and sharper, with extra rows like a shark's mouth. I tried to sedate Linda with a dose of Ativan from my kit, but when I pressed the needle against her arm, it bent like I was trying to inject a steel plate. "Doesn't work anymore," she laughed. "Nothing from the old world works on us. We're better now." The children demonstrated their new abilities by biting through a wooden chair leg, crunching it like a breadstick. "Teeth stronger now," the little girl said in a voice too deep for an 8-year-old. "Stomach bigger. Can eat anything. Can eat everything. Never full, never satisfied. Always room for more." They showed me inside their mouths, and I had to swallow vomit. Human teeth, but grown longer and sharper, with multiple rows sprouting from their gums like some kind of mutation. This wasn't just behavioral change from rabies or drugs. This was actual physical transformation. They worked together to corner me, moving with inhuman speed and coordination. When I tried to bolt for the door, they were there before I could take 2 steps. "Don't run," Linda said gently. "The bite is quick. Then the hunger starts. Then you understand why we're so happy." I could smell them now. That sweet, rotten odor mixed with something else. Something that made my brain scream with primal terror. I grabbed everything from my medical bag and started throwing it at them. Syringes, bandages, my stethoscope. They dodged every throw with impossible agility, laughing as they closed in. Then I remembered the bottle of isopropyl alcohol I kept for cleaning equipment. I sprayed it directly at them, and they recoiled like I'd thrown acid. They hissed and covered their faces, their gray skin actually sizzling where the alcohol hit. That gave me the few seconds I needed to break for the door. They chased me to the ambulance, but when I turned on the headlights and hit the siren, they stopped dead. The bright light and loud noise seemed to confuse them, like their enhanced senses worked against them. I floored the accelerator and didn't stop driving until I reached the hospital in Boo. Nah. Behind me, I could hear them howling. Not human voices, but something that harmonized together in an inhuman chorus that echoed off the mountains. At the hospital, they put me in isolation for 72 hours, checking for any signs of infection. My blood work came back normal. No bites, no exposure to unknown pathogens. Physically, I was fine. The CDC sent a team to investigate the cabin 3 days later. They found it empty except for Tom's remains and evidence of extensive cannibalism. The family had disappeared into the woods, leaving behind only gnawed furniture and walls covered in bite marks. I transferred to Charlotte a month later. I told everyone it was for better pay and career advancement. But the truth is, I know that infection is still out there, spreading through the mountains one bite at a time, creating more families that are always hungry, always looking for fresh meat, always growing stronger. Sometimes I get calls from EMTs still working the mountain routes. They tell me about strange 911 calls from isolated cabins, families who've changed, people who eat everything but are never satisfied. I always tell them the same thing. If the caller sounds too calm about their family emergency, if they mention anyone being hungry or different, don't go in. Call the CDC, call the National Guard, call anyone except the local police because by now, some of them are probably infected too. The hunger virus is still spreading through those dark hollows between the peaks, and it's always looking for new meat to bite.